Chapter 1161, No Way. The moment that gigantic darkness war halberd that was over 10 meters long appeared, everyone's faces suddenly changed. This battle had lasted for close to half a day, but from start to finish, Zhang Yi had always used means to dodge Li Changgong's attacks or stall against him. It was the first time that he had used a killing move with such terrifying power. It's fine, any attack will be slashed by Big Brother's ability, even the most powerful ability can't kill Big Brother, Jian Han said as she clenched her fists. However, she did not notice the deep smile at the corner of Zhang Yi's mouth. The halberd of doom instantly arrived in front of Li Changgong's body. His eyes were crimson as he swung out his twin swords violently. My thoughts cut everything, nothing is unbreakable. The huge black halberd was split directly in half down the center. But this time, it didn't fly elsewhere, instead, it exploded as it passed by Li Changgong's sides. A huge black sphere suddenly appeared in midair, forming an orb with a radius of up to 10 kilometers in an instant. A single attack is ineffective against you, but there's always no way for you to deal with a large-range AoE attack, right? Zhang Yi said as such. He had deceived Li Changgong by just using a small trick. That was to release 2 shots of Halberd of Doom at the same time and then pretend that there was only 1 shot. And then letting it separate when he was close to Li Changgong. This was what created the illusion for Li Changgong that he had split Zhang Yi's Halberd of Doom with a single sword. Big Brother! Jian Han shouted excitedly. Qin Shigong pressed her shoulder and smiled at her. Don't worry, Go Qin will be fine. At some point, Shan Daowen disappeared into thin air. Zhang Yi's eyes were fixed on Li Changgong, who had been hit, and he whispered softly, with the coverage of this attack, you won't be able to escape in time with your ability. Li Changgong, you won't really die, right? Li Changgong certainly did not die. This was in Xinjiang, and there were multiple epsilons staring at this battle, and would not allow Huashu Kingdom to lose one of its top combatants. What's more, the battle between Zhang Yi and Li Changgong wasn't the type that was extremely thrilling, but rather the type that was a tug-of-war with an extremely long time span. With this type of battle, the risk could be minimized. In the void, the darkness dissipated. Li Changgong's body was suspended in midair, his combat uniform shattered and his helmet blew up. He was lying in midair, a thick layer of blue light enveloped around his body, and at this moment, although he was not killed by Zhang Yi, his eyes had lost focus. A strange color flashed inside Zhang Yi's eyes. No wonder Qin Shigong had said that he would have someone protect the duo at a critical time to avoid a fatal incident. It turned out that there was such a trick. In the distance, Shan Daowen flew in as a shooting star as he flew into the middle of Zhang Yi and Li Changgong, letting out a long breath of turbid air. Mr. Chaos, it was agreed that we wouldn't strike to death. Your strike was too heavy. If I had struck a little slower, maybe Go Qin would have really been killed by you. He was the one who had just stepped in to save Li Changgong's life. Zhang Yi glanced at Shan Daowen. This being with the mythological code name Xidagarba King, was, by the looks of it, a mind ability user. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to quickly form a shield with his powerful mind power across the air in such a short time to save Li Changgong's life. Far away in Xinjiang's Earth God's temple, Guanlongyue put away the wooden sculpture in her hand. Zhang Yi's strike seemed strong, but he didn't really want to kill Li Changgong, so there was no need for her to step in and stop it. This was good because if she made a move, the target would be Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi looked at Li Changgong who had already collapsed, but still continued to inquire, is this battle already over? Li Changgong, do you admit defeat? Shan Daowen's eyebrows twitched in amusement, and with a somewhat helpless expression, he glanced back at Li Changgong. Then, was there any need to say? He had made a move, and Li Changgong might have lost his life with that strike just now if he wasn't there. However, Zhang Yi had deliberately said this to completely shatter Li Changgong's confidence. Li Changgong's eyes violently flashed with wave-like ripples before he slowly closed his eyes. Zhang Yi laughed loudly and said in a loud voice, the Northwest King was not pretending to be dead? The commander of the Doors, the supreme commander of the Northwest region, can't beat him and starts playing dead. He pulled his voice and shouted loudly through a megaphone, "My goodness! Could it be that you were counting on the fact that everyone has a short memory and a tight mouth and won't go around talking about this? No way, no how." The intelligent equipment of the combat suits had a very effective sound amplification system, which was to facilitate the giving of orders in times of battle. So when Zhang Yi shouted at the top of his voice, the sound dispersed from the sky towards the surroundings, and the crowd in the distance could hear it clearly. Li Changgong snapped his eyes open. "Don. You say it." Zhang Yi lowered his head and looked at him, condescending. His demeanor was the same as when Li Changgong faced Zhang Yi at the beginning. "No, it's wrong?" He elegantly turned the gun in his hand. "Or was it that you want to continue fighting?" Li Changgong's face was very ugly, and Shang Daowen also looked at him with a playful expression that seemed to say, "Li Changgong, you need to have some face. If you still don't admit defeat, I won't make another move." Li Changgong's throat was hoarse like a rusty tin can. He paused for close to a minute with this one word before finally saying with an incomparably stifled, reddened face, "I lost." After this sentence was said, it was as if something had been drawn out of Li Changgong's body with a syringe. His face rapidly darkened, and his waist and back were no longer as straight as they had been in the past. Qin Shigong, along with Han Shanzhua, Jian Han, and Pa Jigsan, all clearly saw the kind of despondency that was hard to hide in this man's body. Zhang Yi did not say anything more. This blow had already allowed him to completely and utterly regain his face. Being defeated by someone he despised had caused Li Changgong's dignity to be completely shattered. Zhang Yi took half a step back and disappeared in place before flying toward Xingjing City. Shang Daowen looked at Li Changgong and smiled as he comforted him. "Your Excellency Gochen, a momentary victory or defeat cannot mean anything. I hope that you will pick up your spirits and learn from your shame." Li Changgong closed his eyes. "Let me stay alone and be quiet for a while." Shang Daowen raised an eyebrow. "All right then, I'll go back first." Shang Daowen left, the mind in Li Changgong's body disappeared, and he free fell from the air towards the earth. It didn't take long for his body to land in the middle of mud that was full of icy water. He also had space power, so he wouldn't be killed by the fall. But he still let himself fall slightly. The physical pain was able to ease the pain inside him. He used the muddy water to completely submerge himself, and underneath him was a huge deep pit that Zhang Yi had punched out, which had long since been filled with muddy water. Li Changgong sank into the deepest part of the muddy water. He no longer had the face to see anyone. Zhang Yi arrived in front of Qin Shigong and the others. His gaze swept unnoticeably at Jian Han, who had a complicated look in her eyes but said nothing. In a world where strength is honored, Zhang Yi even defeated Li Changgong, so from now on, no one is qualified to say half a wrong word in front of him. Chapter 1162 Either Money or Giving Face. Zhang Yi flew back. After a big battle, he was still in perfect condition. Not only was he unharmed, but his essence was not affected. The gazes of Qin Shigong and the others fell on his body. The way each of them looked at Zhang Yi at this moment had changed significantly. In the past, they thought that although Zhang Yi was powerful, he was ultimately a small person from a lowly background and his ceiling might not be as high as it could be. When he met a general like Li Changgong, the king of soldiers in the army, he would definitely only be crushed. But today, they watched Zhang Yi defeat Li Changgong with his own hands. There was nothing fancy about it, it was just a crushing of hard power. The strong always won everyone's respect, and the same was true for Zhang Yi. Qin Shigong took a deep breath and sighed with emotion, worthy of being the Jiangnan region's absolute defense. His strength is awe-inspiring. Shang Daowen murmured in a low voice, "Chaos, chaos." Chaos is misty and unknowable, making it difficult to see the true nature. It is true that he is as his name suggests, anyone who dares to underestimate him will definitely suffer a great loss. Shang Daowen's words made everyone nod in disbelief. Zhang Yi was hiding too deeply. And his story was actually heard by the top echelons of all the regions. Knowing how each of his battles was seemingly turned against the wind, but actually a solid victory, amidst the disbelieving eyes of others. Such a character left everyone in awe. In their hearts, everyone said, "Never go against this person in the future, because you will never know how many cards he has hidden." Zhang Yi was too good at hiding. This kind of person made it impossible for people to see the depths clearly, but instead, after occasionally revealing a hint of sharpness, it made people feel even more in awe of him. Zhang Yi smiled and said to the crowd, "I won by a fluke of half a point, so I've made you all laugh." He spoke modestly, but everyone didn't dare to really think so. Han Shanzhua hugged his arms and nodded his head while saying, "Youngster, you're really capable. This time around, brother was also convinced of you." He gave Zhang Yi a thumbs up with a heartfelt expression. In reality, Han Shanzhua didn't like the flighty Li Changgong either, and seeing Li Changgong being violently beaten up by Zhang Yi was secretly pleasing in his heart. Zhang Yi smiled and said, Fluke, I'm a bit tired and want to go back to rest and relax first." Qin Shigong hurriedly said, "That was natural." He immediately asked Shang Daowen to arrange for a car to send Zhang Yi back. Qin Shigong's heart was incomparably joyful at this moment. The stronger Zhang Yi was, the greater the success rate of their trip to the Qinling Mountain Heavenly Abyss to exterminate the Earth Centipede colony. Plus a Li Changgong. Even though Li Changgong had lost to Zhang Yi, he had shown enough strength. If Han Shanzhua also agreed to go, he would cooperate with Ghost Valley's Zongyue, the town guardian envoy. For strong chariot-level epsilons should be able to be taken down securely. In the middle of the crowd, Pa Jigsan, who had been silent, stood behind the crowd with his hands behind his back. His gaze moved along with Zhang Yi, and those small eyes slowly narrowed, occasionally flashing with a glint of meaning that was hard to understand. The corners of his large, obese face were slightly curled up, and along with them was the well-groomed mustache. "Chaos, Zhang Yi." He mined silently in a voice only he could hear. "This strange commodity is also available." While Zhang Yi was planning to leave, a sharp shout suddenly came from the ears of the crowd. "Wait! All of you, please don't leave yet." The crowd froze at the sound and looked back to see Li Changgong rushing hurriedly from the distance. The crowd looked at me and I looked at you, their eyes somewhat odd. Wasn't this dude just emo because he lost to Zhang Yi? Burying himself in the middle of muddy water, he hated to never see anyone again in his life. How did he recover so quickly? Li Changgong was back. He was indeed very emo. After all, he had boasted about it at first, only to be slapped in the face by Zhang Yi at lightning speed. Nowadays, he couldn't wait to find a crack in the ground. He even wanted to leave without saying goodbye and directly return to the northwest region with his people. However, after being buried in the middle of the ice water for 5 minutes, he finally realized that escaping was not the way to go. He was now the supreme commander of the northwest region, and if the fact that he had lost to Zhang Yi in this battle was spread, not only would his reputation be damaged, even his rule in the northwest region might be affected. He had just assumed the throne, and with the turbulent winds and clouds below him, he had yet to completely grasp everything. It was likely that someone would use this matter to make an issue out of it. Therefore, he forced himself to endure the feeling of humiliation within him and still chose to come back and appear in front of the crowd. Li Changgong flew to the crowd and landed in front of them, meeting their odd and hard-to-hide gazes as he slowly opened his mask. Qin Shigong asked with concern, "Xian nephew, are you all right?" The corners of Li Changgong's eyes jumped, while Zhang Yi on the opposite side was looking at him with an indifferent expression. Although Zhang Yi did not say a single word, that cold and even somewhat oblivious look still poked Li Changgong once again. Li Changgong could not help but clench his teeth, trying to curb the urge to flee immediately. "Everyone, please wait a moment, there's something I forgot to tell you." The big guys looked at Li Changgong curiously, wanting to see what exactly he could say. Li Changgong took a deep breath and said to the crowd, "This time, we came from the northwest region and brought gifts for all of you. Please don't refuse them yet." As soon as Li Changgong opened his mouth, he was going to give each family a large batch of supplies, worth $100 million before the end of the world. With this outburst, it was $500 million worth of supplies. When the crowd heard this, they immediately understood what Li Changgong was planning to do. These supplies were actually hush money, asking everyone present today to keep it a strict secret and not spread the word about the victory or defeat in this battle. From the beginning, Qin also strictly limited the people watching the battle. Only the representatives of the various regions were here. He was being cautious in his actions, and was also worried that the battle here, including the intelligence of the two men, would leak. That was why Li Changgong decided to pay out money to buy them off after thinking about it for a while. Han Shanzhua laughed cheerfully, "I have no problem with that. Brother, you're so polite, I'll give you this face." Pa Jigsan smiled and didn't rush to answer, but looked at the others. Jiang Han nodded and said, "I will also keep everything that happened here today strictly confidential." Qin Shigong still needed Li Changgong's help, so he naturally nodded in agreement. Then in the end, it would depend on what Zhang Yi's attitude was. Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows and asked meaningfully, "Then what result do you want? To say to the outside that you won?" Li Changgong's face turned a little red, and he wasn't shameless enough to say something like that. "That's not so bad, as long as you don't say anything. I, Go Chen, will mind your favor." Chapter 1163 The Five Continents. Tremor and peace is the most important. Li Changgong's intention was to let the outside world think that the two of them had fought to a draw. That way his face wouldn't look too bad. Saying such words in front of everyone challenged his sense of shame. After all, the result of the battle was in everyone's eyes. It was only for the sake of his future that he had to do this. Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes and slowly said after a while, "Others are just witnesses, while I was a participant. So this time, I want 3 times as much. Counting the appearance fee you let me out, you owe me $600 million in supplies." That was $600 million worth of supplies before the end of the world, enough to fill up a not-so-small warehouse. Moreover, these supplies were different from the superstore supplies that Zhang Yi had once collected. What Li Changgong gave to him had to be the necessities amongst life. For example, food, energy, materials, weapons, and so on. Thus the value was much higher again when calculated in this way. Li Changgong gritted his teeth and nodded in agreement. Zhang Yi immediately smiled, "Brotherly, please don't worry, I, Zhang Yi, love to make friends. You are a friend I am sure to make. As for the matter of our sparring session today, it will only be known to heaven and earth, as well as the people here. It will definitely not be spread out." Li Changgong's heart was also dripping blood. It hadn't occurred to him that this time, he would need to pay out $1 billion worth of supplies in one breath. Those supplies were basically non-reproducible resources, and with the productivity of the Northwest region today, it was impossible to produce them in the short term. But for the sake of his face and status, those supplies had to be taken out. Jiang Han walked over and said softly to Li Changgong, "Big brother, I don't want my share." Li Changgong took a deep breath and did not open his mouth to speak again. Other than the two of them, everyone present was extremely happy at this time. Especially Qin Shigong, Pa Jigsan, and Han Shanzhua, their faces were almost crooked with smiles. They had only come over to watch the fun, and had picked up a great bargain for nothing. However, this favor was not credited to Li Changgong, but rather to Zhang Yi, so the gazes they looked at Zhang Yi all became friendlier and friendlier. Qin Shigong said smilingly, "All brothers are brothers within the 4 seas, and the 5 continents vibrate with harmony. You guys are also considered to be not fighting. After today, the previous grudges are considered to be in the past. Let's all work together and defend our Huashu kingdom together." The crowd laughed, and the scene was filled with a pleasant atmosphere. Only Li Changgong couldn't stop smiling. Qin Shigong arranged for a car to send everyone back. As they left, Li Changgong called out to Zhang Yi, "Chaos." Zhang Yi turned his head to look at Li Changgong. "What?" Li Changgong composed himself and took a deep breath before saying to Zhang Yi, "Don't call out my name in the future." Zhang Yi snorted, "You're so pretentious." The convention of codenames came from the military and was meant to hide one's identity when going on a mission. Only by now, there were only a few epsilons in Huashu Kingdom, so who wasn't sure who the other party was? Li Changgong, however, said to Zhang Yi, Names are a dangerous thing, so you should be careful. Zhang Yi's heart suddenly sped up a few points when he heard these words. Li Changnong's eyes were serious. It was not like he was joking or deliberately picking a fight. It was rather like a veiled reminder. Zhang Yi was silent for a moment and replied, "Well, I remembered. Go Chen." Li Changnong nodded, sullenly, and left with Jiang Han. And this evening's meeting was temporarily ended because of this battle between Zhang Yi and Li Changgong. Only, Qin Shigong had finished saying what he wanted to say. He asked the representatives of each region to go back and think about it, then give him a reply within a week. On Li Changgong's side, he was basically going to agree. He now needed to make one thing to solidify his position. He had just lost to Zhang Yi, so participating in the Qinling Mountain operation and obtaining a share of yuan ore was especially important to him. It was only that apart from him, the others were in no hurry to make a stand. Zhang Yi was secretly pondering in his mind. Actually heading underground was not too much of a problem for him. His ability to save his life came first, and he could easily escape even if he was in a dangerous underground. Moreover, according to the intelligence provided by the Xinjiang region, those 2 Epsilon-level Earth Centipede King insects were only at the 10,000 plus White Chariot level of strength. But he didn't rush to give a reply. Instead, he planned to think about it again and then give a response. Uprushing was not a deal after all, and there was still plenty of time. He could take advantage of this time to take his partners in the shelter for a good stroll around Xinjiang. Zhang Yi and the others returned to Ming Emperor City in Xinjiang. Deng Shintong and the others were waiting outside the conference hall, not even realizing that they had already left long ago and had engaged in a half-day-long battle. So at this time, it was already the early morning of the next day, and the sky was dark, but no one had left, but were waiting for news from Zhang Yi and the others inside the side hall. They just thought that the meeting was too important, so it took a long time. It was only after Zhang Yi and the others returned that they realized that something like that had happened last night. Shou Qi and Yang Xia and the others came over and inquired with a concerned face, "You're not hurt, are you?" Zhang Yi smiled, "Don't worry, I'm fine." He's not. When everyone heard this, they knew that Zhang Yi had won. Everyone's face was a smile of relief. Deng Shintong had a stunned look on his face. He was the only one who wasn't clear about Zhang Yi's strength nowadays, so it was normal for his face to be full of consternation. Only when Zhang Yi's gaze swept over them, Fatty Su was the only one he did not see. Curious, he asked, "Where did Fatty Su go?" The faces of the crowd held some ambiguous smiles. Lu Karen replied, "Brother Chun Lei went out with the housekeeper in charge of receiving us." Zhang Yi's face became subtle. He could not help but associate it with something. And at this time, Fatty Su seemed to have gotten the news of Zhang Yi's return and also walked back from the doors. As soon as he entered the doors, everyone looked at him in unison. Fatty Su scratched his head with a confused expression. "What was it that you guys were looking at me like that? Are there flowers on my face?" Behind him, the courtyard's housekeeper, Liang Yang, smiled as she walked over and bowed respectfully. "Everyone, it's getting late. Do you all want to return to the manor to rest? Or was it that you need to bathe and dine? If there is a need, I will immediately have someone prepare it." Zhang Yi looked at Fatty Su, and then at the tall beauty Liang Yang, and an odd look filled his eyes. "Go back first." There were some words that were inconvenient to say here. So Zhang Yi brought along the crowd and returned to the manor where they lived in the early hours of the morning. Liang Yang retreated and asked people to prepare the services they each needed. Only Zhang Yi and the others from Jiangnan region were left in the room. As soon as the outsiders left, Deng Shintong impatiently inquired, "Old Zhang, did you win Li Changgong?" Chapter 1164, Searching for an Old Friend. Zhang Yi sipped the warm tea and slowly nodded his head. "Hm." Deng Shintong couldn't speak for a long time. "Sure enough, you're still as secretive as you were in the past. No one can see through your strength." Yang Xinxin sat on the sofa not far away from Zhang Yi, holding an exquisite tea light in her hand as she sipped her tea while asking Zhang Yi, "Brother, over there in the Qinling mountain range, are you planning to go?" Zhang Yi smiled faintly and asked in return, "Do you think I should go?" Yang Xinxin nodded without thinking. The Xinjiang region has no reason to victimize my brother. According to them, the fact that the Ghost Valley Town Guardian envoys are all still alive means that the threat beneath the earth is not as terrifying as imagined. And according to the current situation, it's obvious that the East Sea region can't possibly be involved in the operation. Li Changgong will definitely participate in order to preserve his face. As for the Southwest region, Yang Xinxin smiled and shook her head. From the people they sent, we can see that they have no intentions in this regard at all. It's rather perfunctory. But for now, Xinjiang has at least 2 people, Zhen Yuanzi and Go Chen, who can be sent out. The Luya, in the northeast region is still uncertain, but even so, if you, brother, make a move, the 3 epsilons will join forces and act. The probability of success for this operation is high. Zhang Yi nodded. I was thinking the same thing. Besides, there are very many doubts in my mind about that kind of underground secret realm. He thought of the black-armored man in the Misty Valley, and the Sky Dragon King who was worse than death after being transformed. There were also Sky Dragon King's last words when he was dying. A strong sense of crisis enveloped Zhang Yi. Although he didn't know when that crisis would come, the only way to bring about a sense of security was to continuously improve one's strength when one was faced with the fear of the unknown. Yuan or, if he obtained it, Zhang Yi would be able to raise the defense level of the entire shelter by a great level. There was still a lot of profit space in this deal, and it was worth doing. I'll give this matter some thought, but I still need to watch carefully again to see the movements of the other regions. If there are no problems, I can make this trip. As Zhang Yi spoke, Zhou Qi placed one of his arms in front of him, her hands emitting a surfeit of white light as she was checking his body. Avoiding him from receiving dark injuries in the middle of the battle with Li Changgong. Zhang Yi glanced at her, then at Yang Xinxin, Yang Xia, and the rest of the crowd. He smiled and said, "There isn't much going on in the last few days, so we can take a good look around Xinjiang. Right, there's one more thing, old Deng, you come and help me arrange it." Zhang Yi looked towards Deng Shintong. The Deng family had deep roots in Huashu Kingdom and had extensive connections in Xinjiang. Deng Shintong sat up straight. "Just order me if there is anything." Being able to do Zhang Yi a favor was more than he could ask for. Zhang Yi smiled. "Find a way to help me check if everyone has any relatives still alive in Xinjiang. It's best to communicate with people in other regions as well. If you find out that there are still relatives alive, you can send them to Tianhai City." Hearing these words from Zhang Yi, the expressions of the people at the scene immediately became complicated. Uncle Yu let out a long sigh and shook his head. His hometown was in a small village in the north, and as a bachelor who worked outside all the time, he had long since lost any close relatives in his family. Nowadays, Zhang Yi was his family. Not to mention Fatty Sue, who had been hugging the game console since he came back. He was relieved to hear Zhang Yi's words after listening to one sentence. "Luckily all the people in our village died out." Then he lowered his head and continued playing the game. But Yang Xinxin and a few other women were different. Both the Yang and Zhou families had been considered good families, and Lu Karen didn't come from a high background, but her parents were also high-level intellectuals. After the end of the world, the probability of their closest relatives surviving was also a bit higher than the average person. It was impossible to say that they didn't want to look for them. It was just that. Their hearts also had some concerns. If they found their family members, was it better to continue living with Zhang Yi, or to accompany them? Yang Xinxin's expression was the most calm, as she took a sip of the coffee in her cup and said indifferently, "I don't have any family members to look for." Her father had passed away due to illness early in his life, while her mother was remarried abroad, and she rarely had any contact. If not for that, she wouldn't have entrusted her to Yang Xia to take care of her in the first place, sending her to study in a closed aristocratic school like Tianqing Academy. So Zhang Yi said the question, her heart ancient well, directly refused. But not everyone was as sprightly as her. After the end of the world, they all looked forward to their families being alive from time to time. Zhou Haimei placed her hands in front of her knees and clenched them slightly. She thought for a moment, but she still opened her mouth and said, "Then I'll trouble Mr. Deng. I actually have a brother who was doing business in Xinjiang back then, I just don't know if he is still alive." Shou Qian glanced at Zhang Yi with some uneasiness, wrapped her arms tightly around him and said, "I don't know how my parents are doing. If we can find them, can we arrange a residence for them in Tianhai City? And if I do, of course I won't leave your side." Yang Xia chimed in, "It was naturally the same for me." Lu Karen said, "Brother Zhang Yi, I was of the same opinion." Their expressions were a bit odd, as if they were afraid that Zhang Yi would be unhappy. Zhang Yi couldn't help but laugh. "This is a good thing. What kind of expression is this on each and every one of you? If it was your closest relatives, you can all bring them. Tianhai City can afford to feed them nowadays." Zhang Yi himself was all alone, and after his parents passed away, although he also had relatives, he did not interact much in general. But he knew that people were in need of kinship, and he would not deprive his partners of this. "Old Tongue, you go and arrange it," Deng Shintong said. "No problem. Although this side of Xinjiang was also affected in the first place, the impact should be minimal. After all, it was the capital of the country, all kinds of emergency means are very complete. I can go look for them, maybe all of your families are still around. But you all have to be psychologically prepared." Deng Shintong spread his hands. "Let me say the ugly words up front. All of your families, no matter if they are rich or poor, were actually ordinary families after the end of the world. What kind of state it was under the disaster, you all understand." Everyone nodded. They had prepared in their hearts and would not be glassy-eyed. It was just for Deng Shintong to go and look for something so that he could fulfill the mind in his heart. This matter was left to Deng Shintong to arrange, no matter what. When he was done arranging the crowd, Zhang Yi walked over to Fatty Su, who was sitting in the corner, and reached out to pat his shoulder. Only then did Fatty Su avert his eyes from the screen and look at Zhang Yi. "Boss?" Zhang Yi smiled and said, "Talk to me about you and that girl." Chapter 1165. You're really hungry. Zhang Yi had long realized that the woman and Fatty Su were not right. But it was only their first day in Xinjiang, and Fatty Su was already getting restless. If this continues, there's no telling what they'll get up to. Zhang Yi had to step in and take charge. When Fatty Su heard Zhang Yi ask this, he knew it was about Li Yanyan. His old face turned a rare shade of red, reached out and scratched the back of his head, he, and giggled. "Boss, you found it all out, ah?" Zhang Yi rolled his eyes. "I'm not blind either, even a passing dog could see the lewd smile on your big face." Fatty Su's face turned red with excitement. He looked at Zhang Yi seriously and said word for word, "Boss, I think I'm in love." Zhang Yi, what? Zhang Yi froze in place for at least 10 seconds. He opened his mouth and tried to say something, but after half a day of thinking, his brain failed to summarize the right words. After a long time, he said with difficulty, "Didn't you say that you no longer believe in love?" Fatty Su explained, "Before was before, and now is now. At that time, I didn't meet a woman who was right for me, but now." His eyes shone brightly, filled with the sour stench of being in love. "I've found my heavenly destiny." He folded his hands and said with a face full of devotion and happiness, "In the past, I always thought that I would only meet a girl like that when I was playing gal game. But I didn't expect that I would meet one in reality in my lifetime. Boss, I won't miss her this time." Zhang Yi furrowed his brows and looked at the fat man in front of him with some disgust. "I see that you are really hungry. The delusions of dead fat people are the most terrifying. Fatty, what can people like about you? Liking you for being fat and liking you for loving to go to Blizzard City to wash your feet?" Fatty Su was so scared that he hurriedly stood up and put his index finger in front of his lips. "Shoo! Boss, don't mention the past anymore. I've really found true love this time, so you have to support me." Zhang Yi took a deep breath. "Doesn't Your Excellency look in the mirror every day?" She was beautiful to look at, and many people drooled when they looked at her. His hands fell from in front of Fatty Su to the soles of his feet. "With this dignified appearance of Your Excellency, how do you have the courage to say such words?" Fatty Su's complexion dimmed for a moment, but soon, he clenched his fists again, his gaze firm. Boss, this is love. Chang, I love that your mom sells twist love. You dumbass, it's obvious that the woman was aiming at me. Don't you understand such a simple truth? Fatty Sue's body stiffened, then looked at Zhang Yi with eyes full of disbelief. Boss, you already have so many beautiful women around you, and for that you still want to snatch them from me? Zhang Yi took a few deep breaths, forcing himself to resist the urge to hit someone. I mean, the purpose of her approaching you was to extract information about all of us from your mouth. You didn't say anything you shouldn't have, did you? Zhang Yi's gaze became serious. Fatty Sue swallowed his saliva because when Zhang Yi was serious, there was always an aura that made him in awe. He also knew that he should never gag with Zhang Yi at times like this. Fatty Sue's head shook like a rattled drum. Boss, there's nothing. She didn't ask half a word about you. Zhang Yi said indifferently, you've only known her for a day and you love her to death. By the time you're caught up in it, when people casually ask a question, you'd hate to take off your bottoms and show it to them. Fatty, I'm a person who is okay with the people around me, right? Fatty Sue said in his heart, I can't wait for her to want to let me take off my bottoms. Boss, you're exceptionally good to us all, I know this in my heart. Zhang Yi nodded, well, it's good that you know. But this kind of goodness is not without requirements, I only treat my own people well. He didn't say anything more, he just patted Fatty Sue's shoulder and whispered in his ear, if you reveal any bit of news about me, about us, to outsiders. Then for the sake of past friendship, I will send you to Chaoyu Base to step on the generator. Fatty Sue was jolted. Although he hadn't stepped on a generator, he had seen the conditions of the 3 major bases with his own eyes. Although the crowd in the shelter was well fed and clothed, their lives were superior. But in the 3 major bases in Tianhai City, people were still just barely surviving. Those people at the grassroots level, apart from eating and sleeping every day, were almost always laboring, like animals just living for the sake of living. That kind of life was simply worse than death for Fatty Sue nowadays. Boss, don't worry, I definitely won't reveal half a word to her. Fatty Sue immediately stood upright and shouted at the top of his voice. Zhang Yi smiled faintly. I won't look at what you say, I'll look at what you do. He patted Fatty Sue's fat face before telling him to get lost. In Zhang Yi's heart, he had already decided that the woman called Li Yangyang was very problematic. Only, there was one thing he couldn't figure out. Li Yangyang belonged to Xinjiang's Dragon's Roar Guardians, which was a very elite unit. Li Yangyang, as the housekeeper serving them, should have been a very professional person. Even if she wanted to go undercover to spy for information, she wouldn't do it in such a conspicuous way. Even if she wanted to use a beauty trick, she should have come directly over to seduce Zhang Yi. To seduce Fatty Sue, this was too fake. Could it be that she knows that I was a decent man and is afraid that she is not charismatic enough? Zhang Yi rubbed his chin, feeling that there must be something odd behind this matter. He would first give Fatty Sue a precautionary shot and follow up to see what that woman was up to. As for whether Li Yangyang really liked Fatty Sue, well, this could run for the funniest joke of the year. Unless there was something wrong with her eyes, there was absolutely no such possibility. After Li Changgong returned, the 5 extreme war gods under his command immediately came over to greet him. Li Changgong had his hands behind his back, his face wore a lonely expression, not saying a word, but it gave off a feeling of pride. When his men saw this, they were somewhat confused as to how Li Changgong was doing in this battle. After they returned to the place where they were staying, the Sky War goddess came over and complimented, Commander, you must have taught that chaos who doesn't know the heights of heaven a hard lesson this time, right? Li Changgong leaned back in his chair, his expression unruffled as he said indifferently, sort of. The men were a bit puzzled. Sort of? So did you or did you not? Li Changgong sneered and took a sip of tea without haste before saying, I didn't expect that Chaos's strength is actually quite strong as well. He is codenamed Absolute Defense, and basically only defends but not attacks when he fights me, fleeing all the time. Refusing to fight me head on. There's no point in fighting like this, so I had to choose to call it quits.